Hero, I am so glad that you've joined us today. I'm pleased as punch that you've joined us today specifically because today's guest is going to teach you how to fix boring synagogue services. Also, how studying Torah is like jamming in a blues bar, and why sometimes you need potato people.
We use potato people because they were non-gendered, non-aged, non-denominational, somewhat not even religious. The principles are supposed to be principles that apply broadly, not just to us. You didn't want somebody to read the book and think, oh, that doesn't look like me. Right, potato people look like nobody.
Curious? Just wait, because first, today's guest is going to do this.
Welcome to the Jewcurious Show, where learning about Judaism and getting to know Jewish people can help you live a life of meaning, joy, human connection, and personal growth. And now your host, Rabbi John Carrier.
That hero is the song Nola Nigun, performed by the Hadar Ensemble and written by today's guest, the one and only Joey Weisenberg. I can't tell you how excited I was to have this conversation with Joey and how excited I am right now to share that conversation with you. But first, let me tell you a brief story about how I became familiar with Joey and his music and the important stuff that he has to teach. We'll go back in the Wayback Machine, about 3.5 years. I was a brand new rabbi in a synagogue, and I'd been there about 6 months, and I was starting to feel comfortable. I was starting to feel confident. All these skills that I learned in rabbinical school about teaching Torah and about leading prayer, I was starting to feel like I got the hang of it finally in a real live synagogue setting, except that prayer services were boring. I mean, not for me. I was having a great time, and I felt finally competent. All these things that I learned how to do, I was now able to do in public and feel like I was getting it right. But one day I'm leading prayers for a Shabbat service, and I look around, and I realize that the way I'm leading prayer is working for nobody. I mean, it's working for like 2 people. I thought it was working for 2 people, then I realized it was working for 1 person, and the other person was just sort of being polite. And I thought, man, that's not fair. I have just gotten kind of good at this stuff, and this is the way I always saw it done in synagogues, and this is the proper way I learned how to do it. But why doesn't it seem to be working? Why don't people seem to be engaged? Is it me? Is it the tradition? So I did what I always do when I have a conundrum about Jewish stuff, and I went to my rabbi. Aaron Alexander is one of my many teachers at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. And I said, this is the way you all taught us how to do this. This is the way it's been done for dozens, if not hundreds of years. Why doesn't it work? And he said to me something I will never forget. He said to me, John, everybody has this problem. You're not the first person to notice that synagogue services, the way we traditionally do them, have lost people and have seemed boring for some people. But let me give you a suggestion. You know how it feels when everyone in the room is singing a song that they all know. This could be Happy Birthday. This could be Take Me Out to the Ball Field at the 7th inning stretch. You know how that feels? And I said, yeah, it feels like everybody is connected somehow on a deeper level in a way that, kind of transcends the words of the song. And he said, yes, that's exactly right. And you need 2 of those. And if you have 2 of those moments, and you teach some Torah in between, that is a service. That is a service to God. That's a service for the people who are in the room. And that's essentially all you really need. You need to create those moments of communal feeling, a feeling of communal connectedness And then while the people are there, teach some Torah, because that's what rabbis do. And that's it. Everything else is harmonizing on that melody. Everything else is additional traditions that have evolved around our prayer service. So go out and make those moments of song and teach your little Torah, and you'll be just fine. So I walked out of my rabbi's office, and immediately I thought about a book that I read a couple of months earlier called Building Singing Communities by a fellow named Joey Weisenberg. And this book is all about just that. It's about creating those moments of a communal feeling of connectedness through song, and how to set up prayer spaces and how to lead prayer services and how to make those moments happen on a consistent basis, and how to build a community that is attracted to and creates for others those moments of connectedness. And little by little, I started implementing these lessons in my synagogue. And over the last few years, it has had a transformative impact. If you ask people how they connect to the service, if you ask people how they connect to each other, everybody says it's been an incredible improvement, and people look forward to getting together and singing together as a part of normal Jewish holiday and Shabbat gatherings. And since then, I've taken every opportunity I can to learn with the author of this book. I met him at a conference of synagogues where he was leading the Shabbat services. I went to his Singing Communities Intensive that happens in New York every year. You'll read more about how to get connected to that in the show notes. And last summer, we even had him come to our synagogue to do a workshop that just blew everybody's mind. And so if you'd like to learn more about how to have this experience or to create this experience in your community, please keep listening, because we're going to get deep into all that stuff today. But before we dive in, I want to take a brief moment to ask you for a favor. Now, normally this is the time on the program where I suggest that you subscribe so that you can automatically download future episodes as they become available, or rate or review this podcast. Today, I'm not going to do that, because today I want to let you know about something very special that's coming up, and that is the 31-day Jewish Fall Holidays Challenge. If you're listening to this show when it comes out, then 1 week from today, August 1st, 2018 of the Common Era, starting August 1st and through the entire month of August, I'm going to release one video every day for 31 days on YouTube. And the subject of these videos covers Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. That's the high holy days, and one of our big festival days, which is actually like 7 days plus some change at the end. You put all this stuff together, it's like a whole month of holidays where the Jewish community gets together. People who don't see each other all year come for these events and see each other. It's got amazing traditions like blowing a ram's horn and eating slices of apple dipped in honey. Would you like to know why we do those things? Then I suggest you accept the 31-day Jewish Fall Holidays Challenge. And by signing up for this challenge, you will get every single day in August a link to a brand new video covering some topic about these holidays. And why am I doing it now? The holidays are weeks away. It's so that you know what to do, you know how to get prepared, you know where to go to find a place to celebrate the holidays, and you know what to do when you get there. You know what page we're on. You know why we do these things that we do. And once you know these things, your experience of the holidays themselves is transformed, and it's really taken up a notch, because I've always found the more I learned about what we're doing in the synagogue and in communal settings and why we do these things, the more I personally get out of it, and the more these Jewish traditions help my life to prosper and flourish and be filled with meaning and joy and connection and growth. And I want that for you, hero. So the one thing I'm going to ask you to do today, hero, besides listening to this great conversation with Joey Weisenberg, is go to jewcurious.show/challenge and sign up. And once you're there, you'll notice that I've got a special thing that I'm doing to help make this challenge more fun. And I don't want to spoil it, but I'll just give you the words: Starter Jewish Library. And if you're excited about any of those words, this is going to be a treat. But enough about that for now. Right now, I want to jump into this conversation with Jewish musician extraordinaire, Torah scholar, and my teacher, Joey Weisenberg.
Come to the microphone. I have my teacher, my mentor, one of my musical idols, if you will. Now, that's not a good term. That's not a good term for a Jewish podcast. So somebody who I really admire, and that is Joey Weisenberg. Joey Weisenberg, welcome to the Jewcurious show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Of course. It's my honor. I know you're just back from summer, so like a summer vacation, or you're just back in the office. And I remember you telling a story one time in a room that I was in, that you have this ritual that often happens in the summertime. And I'll ask about it this way: who's your favorite? Without getting political, who's your favorite U.S. president?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm sitting here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin right now. I live in Philadelphia, but I'm from Milwaukee, and my family's been here since before the Civil War, when they came over from Hamburg, Germany, with lots of other German Jews, And, I like to think back around that time when my family was coming, and it was just about, they arrived in 1856 and they launched right into this era of American life, which was so powerful and so disturbing and so rich. And the man at the helm there was Abraham Lincoln. So I find when I come back to Milwaukee, I often read a biography of Lincoln, or sometimes of other famous presidents, but I really like Lincoln because of all, because of the way he brought so many different ideas and people into relief and into discussion, and broke down barriers in ways that people hadn't before him. In fact, I was reading once a biography by Doris Kearns Goodwin called "The Team of Rivals," and in it she was describing how Lincoln used to walk down amongst the long lines of troops, and they would line up for miles waiting for him to arrive. And as soon as he would come down the lines, they would part to the left and to the right, making room for him to come through. And he was like a royalty, So when I read that, I wrote a melody, what we call a nigun, a wordless melody, and I called it Lincoln's Niggin. And it's become one of my favorite things, and I dedicated it to him. A very American sounding melody. Do 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 do. Da 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 da. It goes on like that. I can sing it the full way someday. And
well, I'll make sure I link to it in the show notes.
It's available.
It is on the internet. It is wherever CDs are still sold. It's available.
And those melodies like that. The night that I wrote that, I wrote it on a Friday, and on when Kabbalat Shabbat came around, that's the Friday night prayers services that welcome the Sabbath. There's a melody called Lecha Dodi, a famous bunch of poetry, and in it says, to the right and to the left they part, to welcome the Shabbat Queen. And so I started singing that melody to those words, and so the American and the Jewish began to blend.
Oh, that's remarkable. I never got that. I mean, I love the melody. I love Lecha Dodi, but I never saw the connection really, other than it's Joey, right? It's this American heritage and this Jewish soulful music kind of in a mashup, but I never saw that image of Lincoln parting the troops standing to one side and to the other, the same way we might welcome the Shabbat Queen, for example.
Yeah, Yaminu small, to the left and to the right, Tifro Tziviat, so forth. Yeah,
that's amazing. Now, I want to introduce you to my friends. I want to introduce you to the audience of this show, the heroes, the Jewcurious people, because of how impactful you've been in my life and how impactful you've been in the life of my community. And it started with me reading a book called Building Singing Communities. And then I came into a community that needed some building, frankly. And I had read your book, Building Singing Communities, about how to bring communities together through song. Can you say just a little bit about that book and more importantly, like what prompted you to write it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm Jewcurious too. Right? I'm curious about what Jewish life can mean, and what we can do together, and that includes Jews and non-Jews, but in all variations of particularity and universality. In fact, my father was a convert to Judaism, and my other sides of my family have been Jewish for a long time, and we live in a country and in a time where there's tremendous mishmash and mushel of different ways of being and in different relationships to Judaism. And one of the things that always has been clear to me is, while many things about being Jewish have not always been clear to me and are still developing, music has always been something that I've had a sort of emunah shlema, like a complete belief in. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of thing where I hear music, and especially old, rich music that comes from centuries past, and also new music. But I hear old music, and it makes the hair stand up on my arms, mm-hmm. and I can feel the heart and the soul in it, and I feel like when I've heard music since the beginning, it's been that experience of just feeling washed away in sound and having the dogma of religion falls away when music starts. And that's why you can go into any church or synagogue or ashram or wherever you might find yourself, and you hear the music, and suddenly some of the religious dogma becomes less important, and the human spirit becomes more transparent. So for me, Jewish music was something that I first encountered as a Shabbat practice of sitting around at your table and singing melodies together. And that's the essence of community, is just getting together, sharing a bit of food, singing. And that has over time become a spiritual practice for me. Mm-hmm. Maybe my most important one, which is the ability to sing, to listen to the silence, to be together with people in that process. I'm an introvert by nature, and I need a lot of time by myself, but still there's nothing like the magic that happens when other people get together around a melody. And the way that a melody can allow people to open up their beings so that their wisdom and their experience pours forth into the room. It can sometimes happen without even any words happening at all, although sometimes the music can pave way for words of wisdom as well, and for poetry and for the intellect. Mm-hmm. And the thing was that I was noticing how powerful an experience music was for me, but I was also noticing, on the other hand, that when I'd go into normal Jewish communities around the country, it was as if none of that was available to anybody. It was like, I was like, where is all of that power? Is a question I was asking myself. In fact, and I felt over the years maybe even more judgmental and irritated by that than I feel now, because now I feel, as I get older, I mean, not that I'm that old, but as I get older, I have more and more compassion for why things are the way they are. And but when I was in my early 20s, I was really upset with the Jewish world. Like, why is it that we're just, what it really was? It was asking this question: how is it possible that we all get together every week? Not all of us, but that some people get together every single week in synagogue, and there's just such sheer boredom. And how is it possible?
You have a room with dozens or hundreds of people with awesome acoustics and with a rich musical tradition and songbook and a people known for a fair amount of creativity, and then we get this.
Yeah, just a very passive, waiting for something to happen that never comes. It was, a little bit the opposite of the experiences that I've had going into Baptist churches, say, where you walk in and within about 5 minutes, you're sort of swept up in the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. Some of those places could stand to learn a little bit more about quiet from time to time, but we all have something to learn. Right. But I wanted to feel the musical power of a community, and I wanted that to become something that we could feel more frequently. Mm-hmm. And I know that at the time, when I was getting started, which was probably a dozen years ago or so, a lot of, although I've been involved with this in various ways my whole life, but, as a more serious occupation, mm-hmm. a lot of people were blaming the leadership and saying, well, we don't do this because nobody ever leads us that way, or, and what I realized was that we had to focus on the followership. Mm-hmm. That the leader is like a match that you light, and it's the leader is the match, mm-hmm. and then there have to be people around that leader who are super bought in and really want to see something happen, and they are the kindling. Mm-hmm. And maybe a little bit of newspaper that's thrown in. We're trying to build a bonfire of song. Right. And in this bonfire of song, you need the match, and you need the kindling, and you need the lighting agents. And then you need all of the logs to be brought close together. Right. Because when you try to make a bonfire and you put all of the logs 10 feet away from each other, well, big surprise, they don't catch. Right. In fact, that's the surest way to put out a fire is by putting the logs far apart.
Right. So this is probably one of the most basic but most counterintuitive things that I got from reading Buildings and Communities like 4 years ago. I do this in a Socratic, somewhat annoying way. I'll go into a community that I'm trying to pass this onto, and I just ask the question, okay, if we want to have more song in here, if we want to fill the room with song, what's the best way to do it? And the most common answer I get is, well, you take the best singers and you spread them around the room, right? You kind of seed them around the room, and that'll fill the room, and it'll inspire people next to that person to sing, and then you'll fill the room with song.
Right. And that's a very well-intentioned idea.
Right. And that never works.
Right. Because what happens is when you take the people who like to sing and you space them out throughout the room, well, they get blown out by the wind mm-hmm. very quickly. Mm-hmm. By the wind of apathy and passivity. Right. Right. So if you want to have any fighting chance of having a fire of song, then the people who might want to sing have to come close together and support each other and warm each other up. And over time, if that's going well, then people will start to lean in and catch fire themselves, right, in a good way. Of course, you can't have the logs too close together, because if you put the logs too close together, there's no room for air, right. And they can't, in that analogy. But at the same time, basically, the closer together people get, the more powerful the song is. And I would say I've noticed that with every inch that people get closer together, literally as much as just leaning in a little bit, let alone if they actually move. With every inch that people get closer in, there's an exponential growth in the power and the nuance and the subtlety and the beauty and the unity of the song. And that's what we're going for.
This is very well illustrated in your book, and I have to say the illustrations are fantastic. Did you draw those?
No, my friend Julie Meslin drew those. She drew the potato people. We use potato people because they were non-gendered, non-aged, non-denominational, somewhat non-even religious. The principles are supposed to be principles that apply broadly, not just to us. But, you didn't want somebody to read the book and think, oh, that doesn't look like me. Right. Well, potato people look like nobody.
Right. It's not just Ashkenormative European Jewish men of a certain body mass index.
Right.
and age.
Although they might look closest to that if you just look at a straight potato.
My favorite illustration, and I know this is an audio medium, so this is my way of encouraging people to buy the book, is right in the beginning, this illustration of what you call shul the musical. Right. And shul, for people to know, is a Yiddish word for synagogue, comes from school, because people go there to learn, God willing. And so shul the musical is this illustration of a synagogue service as a kind of Broadway production with a stage that is separate from most of the people who are there. And there's lights and there's a production and there's people who are singing to you rather than with you. And I think that's the disconnect that I think a lot of people feel. People don't feel encouraged to sing because, the professionals sound so good. And I'm here in pews designed to keep us not looking at each other with eyes forward.
Yeah. And that's just, I'm not, my purpose has never been to make music worse. In other words, we're not trying to get rid of anything that takes professionalism and get rid of it, right? If anything, someday I think that will find a higher place in Jewish life again. But there's a basic difference between performance and the leading of communal prayer. Which is being a shaliach tzibur, or a messenger of the people, is what they call the prayer leader, right? And a prayer leader, a messenger of the people, is the very term connotes that you need to be able to hear the people's prayer and message it, so to speak, right? You have to be able to notice what everybody is doing, what they're feeling, to be able to read the feelings of 10 or many dozens or hundreds of people, and bring them all together in some communal prayer, right? That's the essence of Jewish prayer is that the prayer leader feels the minyan, right? That it feels the quorum of people who assemble. And that person cannot do that if he or she is detached from the people by a stage and by dozens of feet in between. If the person wants to feel the prayers of the people, they have to be in the middle of the people, in the palm of the people, held up by the people. And so that's, the number. If there's two things that we need to see in shuls, one of them is that the leader comes to the middle of the room, as gets off the stage, and we just get rid of the stage altogether. And the second is, as we've already discussed, which is that we have to then come close around that leader. And for every inch that we're closer, we have a greater connection. And the prayer leader becomes more and more intuitive to the prayer leader what the potential is of the community's prayer.
Yeah, I love that. And I've had that experience in my synagogue trying to apply these principles. First was the challenge of getting people closer together. And I found that sometimes I'll do that with group study. I'll say, hey, let's study a text together, get with your neighbor and we'll pair up. And then they forget to move back. Right. And it's like, you're stuck. Now you get to sing together. And that sounds better when you do. And then the other one is this idea of I came into a synagogue that was more that frontal orientation with the bima, with the high place, with the stage, as it were. And what I did from the beginning is I pulled, instead of leading from the rabbi's lectern, not to be confused with the cantor's lectern, speaking of civil wars, is I just pulled a simple podium down into the middle of the room, right? And then I pray facing the ark, so we're all oriented in the same direction. And so that, first, it feels great. So if there's any rabbis or prayer leaders out there, it feels really good because you can actually hear people singing in your ears, and it makes you sing better. And it really, you do feel that connection of where people are at, and you know when you need to slow down, and you know when you need to up the tempo and pick up the spirit a little bit. The one challenge I found was that, so I found out that wherever I put my podium, people would sit behind me. So it was almost impossible to start in the middle of the room. So I said, okay, I accept this, but I'm going to put the podium here. And as we work through the service, imperceptibly, I sort of pull it back, inch by inch, and I look like
row by row.
I look like I'm swaying my body with the music, but actually I'm slowly pulling the podium backwards until I'm in the middle of this group of people.
I love it.
And it feels great. And nobody says, "Hey, how'd you get there?" So I want to reflect on something real quick. As a musician and an author, I want to test a quote with you. This is a quote that is most credibly sourced to the comedian Martin Mull, who said, "Writing about music is like dancing about architecture." And now, we're going to talk about your second book in a minute, but I just want to reflect on that with you. How does this idea sit with you?
Yeah, well, I've felt for a long time. I mean, I've there's two things. Let me back up. When you're working with Jews, right? It's it's often not enough to just do one artistic medium, right? Because you can't. Sometimes it's like it's impossible to do music without also having some form of book that goes along with it.
Right.
This is completely unnecessary in other cultures, but by Jews, if they don't have a book, then
it didn't really happen.
Yeah, it's like, how do I know this is real?
That's right.
Right. So I learned a while back that if I write a book, it can give more credence to a project. But the thing is that the book of any writing about music, this kind of gets towards your quote. There's 1,000 words of writing can be summarized in 2 notes of song, right? It's like you can one melody can teach you more than an entire book about music, right? Like, look, I can talk till your ears get sore about this topic and about my love of music and about what the sages thought about music and so forth, but it's never going to be as good as singing like the notes themselves, they're real. Right. and the words are abstract. And it's funny because you can write the words down, but the notes are actually more ephemeral. Right. But
I feel sorry for anybody who reads the transcript of this podcast. I might have to have an arranger do the sheet music for that. That was really beautiful. So you were talking about how the sages felt about music. And so I want to get into a little bit on your newer book. It's not new, but it's newer. That's the Torah of music. When did you decide to write this book, and what made you decide to write it?
Yeah, thanks. I've been working on this book for 5 years or so, and it came out this past winter. And but really, it's a collection of ideas that I've grown up with. That started off by hearing musicians playing in blues bars when I was performing as a blues guitarist when I was 13 through 17 in Milwaukee. And it's a record of the wisdom that in some ways that I've learned from musicians my whole life. Never formal, just their generosity of spirit and their sharing of song and of guitar licks and of rhythms and of harmonies and beats and the way people can come together around song. And I learned a lot of teaching from them. Right. And so when the word Torah of music, Torah means teaching. Mm-hmm. Right. And so in some ways, this book is, what does music have to teach us? Right. What is music's teaching? And then on the other hand, it's also a collection of words of actual Jewish Torah teachings, mm-hmm. which means like anywhere from the Old Testament, the Torah, through all of its interpretations and its mm-hmm. rabbinic and interpretations throughout history, which is referred to broadly as Torah. Mm-hmm. So what I set out to do was to look at the dreamscape that Jewish teachers have described in words throughout time, to track down hundreds and hundreds of sources of how how the sages especially thought about music over time, and then to try to condense those to curate those into a sort of dreamscape synopsis, as if all of the rabbis throughout time were actually talking to each other in conversation, right? And I felt what I was hoping for was to be able to capture the place at which all of those texts and how they thought about music intersects with my own dreamscape, as I've learned from my own sages who were musicians, mm-hmm. right? I'll say that as I traveled around the country and around the world in the last 12 years, everywhere I would go, a lot of times I would meet a teacher or a rabbi or somebody who would know at least one thing about music. Mm-hmm. And often it was telling some story that they knew from some rabbi of ages past. Mm-hmm. Or some mythical story of music, starting anywhere as early as the very first musician in the Torah in Genesis, whose name was Yuval. And I found that as I traveled, people always would share these things with me. And after a while, I realized, hey, if I just keep track of all these things, it's an immense body of musical inspiration, even if it has no notes attached to it at all. Right. Right. And so 5 years ago, I started to write down the things that I remembered, and from my one-day teachers and all these places I had been. Mm-hmm. And I started to research them and to look more carefully and to track down all of the stories to see if they were things they had made up or if they were things that had come from actual Jewish sources. Old Jewish sources. Right. Yeah, right. And so then that became probably the hardest project I've ever done in my life, because I am no Torah scholar, so it took me a long time to work through those and to develop the skills to be able to read the Aramaic texts and the Yiddish texts and the Hebrew. And, that's been something I've also been working on for my whole life is just clawing my way towards basic competency.
Yeah, there's a teacher of mine, not of mine, a teacher of everybody, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, talks about Judaism as an exoteric religion versus an esoteric religion, meaning in an esoteric religion, there are secrets that are kept and only shared with a certain few. Right. The adepts, the priests, the people who study for a long time, then certain mysteries are revealed to them. Whereas Judaism is literally an open book, or several books, if you will. The challenge is that a lot of those books are in Yiddish or Aramaic, mm-hmm. Or in Hebrew. But all the more so, it's important to find teachers who can share that, who can elucidate that for you, and then give you that skill, and then it's yours forever. Right. And I love how you talk about this sort of parallel pedagogic behavior of Jewish texts and musical notes, because I can picture, you're playing, in a room, or you're in a blues bar or something, and somebody just shares a few notes with you that then becomes part of your repertoire, but only because somebody shared it with them. Right. And that could go back a very, very long time. And so much of Jewish teaching comes the same way. Like, I teach what my rabbis have taught me, and they had to get it from someplace. And it goes back to, if you believe Pirkei Avot, and I do, back to Moshe Rabbeinu.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And sometimes it's hard and sometimes we, I'm going to out some rabbis, including myself. Sometimes we teach things that we heard and it may or may not have come straight from the Torah, or I may not have be able to go right back to the Daf and Amud and the Talmud where it came from, but I heard it from a rabbi and it opened up things for me. And so I share it with other people, and then that becomes part of the unfolding creation of our story. And I love how you parallel the development of music in the same way. Now, do you have a favorite story in the book, or a favorite text?
Oh, so many. I mean, I like how you're describing that, by the way. That's the essence of every form of art and every form of wisdom, is that that we're able to refer in some way to the long storyline of wisdom that preceded us. Right. So that we were able in some cases to step outside of only knowing our own circumstance, and to be able to see that even if it seems new to us, well, these struggles have happened before. And we've developed some ways of coping with things so that we don't always have to be blindsided by everything. That's the essence of Torah, is learning from the questions and the ideas, and sometimes the prescriptions or proscriptions of those who've come before us, seeing all of their ideas as a treasure trove of lore and of mythical questioning. That guides us, and that we are just playing our little momentary role in before it's passed on. Right. And that's certainly the case with music too, which comes from time immemorial. And in the Jewish world, they actually say also that some of the oldest melodies, where we don't know where they come from, they're Sinai, from Sinai, that they were actually, they were given along with the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai.
It's kind of like your first book came with a CD.
Yeah.
Building Singing Communities has a companion volume, and so when the Torah was given, here's the companion original cast recording.
Right. And some of it's totally ridiculous. There'll be melodies that are, like the Kol Nidre melody, which is probably the most famous melody. Kol Nidre, so forth. They say that's Sinai, which of course it isn't, because it sounds, so many melodies that they say are from Sinai are clearly not. But and so this is not a matter of it being true or not, if melodies are from Sinai, or if any Torah is from Sinai. It's not a matter of if it's true. It's a matter of that our sages thought enough of these things to give them that credit, that it could come directly from the mouth of God, so to speak, from the pen of God.
Well, that could be helpful. It could also be limiting in a way. Anytime we have an idea and somebody questions that idea and say, "Oh, that's Sinai. That's from Sinai." When a community is maybe stuck in its music, or if you go in and you say, well, this place could benefit from, sitting a little closer together, maybe learning a new tune together. And they say, well, we can't do that. I'm trying to think of a particular melody, like the Rothblum version of whatever, right. some relatively new composition that's worked its way into our liturgy to nope, that's how it is. And it has to be that way, or people don't feel like it's Shabbos.
Right. Yeah. And, in the end, a melody is just a bunch of notes. And similarly, a piece of Torah is just a bunch of black marks on white paper. It's not so important what the melody is or what the words are. What's important is what we do with those things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And a melody, on a piece of paper, a melody might be like, let me make something up. A melody might be like, do, 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 do. Right. All you see are just those finite notes. Mm-hmm. But when it comes into being, it's right. There's all of the stuff that's in between the notes. That's what brings it alive. Mm-hmm. And the same thing is true with a piece of Torah, right? There's a few words that we have, and what brings it to life is what happens in between the words.
I want to tell a quick story about my experience that has a question that I hope will be helpful for some of my audience. I came to Los Angeles about 9 years ago, and that was to go to school to become a rabbi. And my exposure to Jewish music to that point had been in, I'll say, pretty awesome and mainline and average, like awesomely average, like very normal to me, conservative synagogues in Northern Virginia suburbs, Minneapolis suburbs, Knoxville, Tennessee. And they all had very similar musical tunes. I learned a few extra ones here and there when I moved. And then I came to Los Angeles. And then I went to a particular synagogue that is known for its animated and creative use of Jewish music. And I hear what I now know as a nigun, but to me, it just sounded like kind of Native American chanting, if I can say that, because it was very animated. It was in a major key of all things, and there were no words, and it was more like die, die, dies and yeah, yeah, yeahs. And I thought of this kind of primal vocal music without any kind of text to it whatsoever, much less a psalm. And my immediate gut reaction was, well, that's not Jewish. Right. And thank God I've changed my tune about that a little bit, pardon the pun. But it was sort of an immediate reaction to being in a new space and hearing a new sound that was very dissonant from everything that I knew about Jewish music. Right. And so for the benefit of people who are listening to this and they've maybe only been in one or two synagogues in their life, or maybe they haven't been in a synagogue since they were, let's say, I'll just pick a number, 13 years old. Uh-huh. And they say, I don't want to go to synagogue. The music is just so boring. It sounds like a German polka or something. And it's not for me. How do you suggest people open up to that? I mean,
it's funny.
What's the way to get over that challenge?
I had an opposite story, which was I had the privilege a few times of going to a Native American powwow here or there, and there they were sitting, a bunch of bearded men sitting around in a circle, going oh yeah 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 and something along these lines, and which was so powerful. And then a bunch of people dancing, and all I could think was they're singing a niggin.
Right. And you could see on YouTube Rabbi Schneerson doing the same thing with
it's a bunch of I mean, that the thing is that it does come from a sort of to the normal suburban experience of America. The world of singing a niggin or of singing like something like you'd hear in a powwow is a foreign experience, right? The nigunim, that's the plural for wordless melodies. They came out of a different world. They came out of a world of Eastern European Jewry, where people surrendered their entire beings to a melody. There was no decorum, and when they sang, especially in the Hasidic world, there was no such thing as song without dance. Kind of like Miriam, even. I mean, that's an old tradition that Miriam went around with the toph and the machol, the drum and the dance, Mm-hmm. It's like anytime you find the drum and the music, you find the dance. That was old. That's basically the truth in most old cultures. You don't have music without dance, and even David the king, when he would sing, he was always dancing. Even in sometimes he would embarrass people with how much he danced. And this is the thing is that when Jews got to America, they left behind a lot of their capacity for dance and for singing and for basically much expression, especially in their own context. They went on to channel their creativity into becoming leaders of music and song and art and stuff in all different realms that were not Jewish, but in the Jewish realm,
right? Irving Berlin, maybe,
right, or countless other composers in the 20th century, for example. But in the actual Jewish context, the synagogues wanted to become more and more like their American church counterparts, white church counterparts, right? Which was, they wanted to enter middle class or upper class white society. Right. And that society, which was heavily Protestant, was, or Catholic, which it did not have things like dancing for the most part. Right? That's not part of the culture. It was, and so Jews left behind a lot of their ability to do such things, and sort of threw out the baby with the bathwater, in my opinion. Like, I understand now that it was very important for them to succeed and to try to enter society wherever they could. But now we're looking back and saying, what did we throw out? What are we leaving behind? Why is it that we go into a place of quote unquote worship and nobody ever knows how to cry? There's no crying. There's no movement. It's hard to identify what the spiritual purpose of it is. Right. So here we are, we're looking back to times past and trying to reclaim some of the older modalities of expression. Right. And that includes the most raucous and loud and joyous expressions. And it also includes the most quiet, meditative, contemplative aspects, such as which goes back to the tradition of Hannah, of Hannah, who was known for her quiet prayer, where she would go to the priest and she would move her mouth and nothing would come out, and she prayed silently. And that's one tradition that we have kept. But unfortunately, it's now in most places replaced by people going around and talking to each other. We've even destroyed our silences. Right.
As I heard from a jazz musician on the radio a couple of years ago, sometimes the very best notes are the rests.
Exactly. Yeah. It's music that paves the way through noise and teaches us to be quiet. It teaches us to hear the beauty of silence.
I've said this over and over again. The work that you've done has been pivotal, not just for me and my own personal spiritual expression, but for building connections, for building community in the community that I'm a part of here in Burbank. And you are bringing this world, I don't want to say back to life, but it's just like you're inhaling into it and it's expanding and you can see it all over the place. And I was teaching something in your name the other day. We're at Devarim. We're at the beginning of the book of Deuteronomy that begins with, it's Moses' last speech to the people. And he says, before I give you my final word, my final instruction, before you go into the land, I need you to tell you where you came from. Right. And he rehearses, he relives the whole story from the time of Egypt for the benefit of people who didn't leave Egypt, because everybody who was there almost ready to go into the promised land wasn't born yet when they left Egypt. Right? That was part of the deal with the spies. And so he says, I need you to know where you came from, and here's your story again. And some of the notes, had a little bit of a wah-wah pedal on them. And some of the story changed a little bit in the retelling. But it made me think of something that I learned from you. And this was years ago. I think I got a CD from Rabbi Joe Schwartz, whom you know, I think in New York City, of your music I haven't been able to find the CD since. I think it's an early recording of Nigunim. And you didn't just sing the songs, you sort of shared the story of the songs along with the tracks. And there was one particular nigun, and I know I'm going to get it wrong, but you described it as coming from, maybe it was found in sheet music, and it came from a community that no longer exists. Because of the troubles in Europe in the 20th century. And I want to say it's like I don't know if I'm picking the right one, and I apologize to everybody who did
that one qualifies.
Yeah. So like where do you find these things, and how do you bring them back to life? Because for me, that's the same exercise that Moses was doing, right? He's keeping a story going for a brand new people.
Yeah, that's what he did. He said, and then of course the ending of that story that you're sharing is that Moses's final commandment that he shares is number 613. He says, put this song into your lips. He says, put this song into your lips and sing it. Right. And that song, there's debate about what that's referring to, but many think that he's referring to the song of the Torah. And he says, put this song into your lips and pass it down, basically. And when you're learning music, there's nothing like learning it from a real person. In other words, learning it from a person who learned it from somebody who, even if that person composed it, they were taking the inspiration from music from somewhere else, from past all the way back to that song that was given at Sinai, right? And so it's certainly the case that the best way to learn a melody is from a person, because when you learn from a person, you actually get all of the life along with the melody. You don't just get the notes, you get the whole life force that comes from a person in real life. Right. And that you can't replace that. There's no way to learn that from a CD. Right. Although you get little hints of it. Right.
So if you hear,
and then, the thing is that sometimes we don't have that person around. So you go to CDs and then you hear the notes as sung by somebody, right? And then there's some cases, especially given the fact that if you're working in Jewish music and you're trying to learn a Jewish melody, that so much of Jewish culture was traumatically demolished in the last century, right? Which is just we're reclaiming life now in dramatic ways, I think, but we're still living in a sort of traumatized world of Jews, even several generations later. And so we have to accept that there's some discontinuities in the tradition, and that we have to go, in some cases, we have to look, and this is the way it is with lots of the things that we read, which lots of the Torah we learn, but it's also true with melodies that sometimes you don't have a person around or a CD to teach you some of the old things. And so, or an online source or whatever. So you have to look at the old notes that happened. So in this case, there was a guy named Moshe Beregovsky who went around Eastern Europe in the 1920s, almost a century ago, recording, like Alan Lomax, recording all of these hundreds and hundreds of melodies and writing them down that represented a huge collection of musical material from Eastern European Jews who were about to be demolished, literally wiped away. And one of the advantages of being able to read music is I could go back and look in those notes and find all of these melodies just waiting to be sung again. Mm-hmm. Right. And I have to say, like, unfortunately, we don't have the original singers, so we don't know exactly what it sounded like, but we have a pretty good idea, and we breathe new life into old notes, and what we do is we perform a sort of trias mesim on these notes, which means, what's that mean? Revivification.
Right.
A resuscitation of an old melody.
The resurrection of the dead in more King James version.
The resurrection of a melody. Mm-hmm. And there's even, there's an old Yiddish story by parrots about called a Gilgul von a Niggin, which means the transmigrations of a melody, or the life cycle, returning life cycles, reincarnations even of a melody, and that it's true, and that the melodies thrive and then they disappear, and then over the centuries some of them miraculously reappear. Right. And it's like, so this melody you're talking about lay dormant for 100 years, and then I heard it from a clarinet player named Michael Winograd, who had gone through all of Berezovsky's melodies and was playing them on the clarinet. And he played this melody like which is in Berezovsky number 196, and maybe 96 or something like that. I can't remember that. But he goes like yum dum dum dim dum da dum da. So he played it like that, and then I adapted it just a little bit, like gave it my little signature, and sing it like dum bum 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 dum dum da. It goes on like that. I mean, I could sing the rest of it, but right, yeah, that's the idea is this melody was one of the first things that I ever really got a hold, really reintroduced back into the American, not back into it, really for the first time into the American world. And it actually comes from a very old source. It was already called traditional and old in his day.
Well, what I remember and I guess what I reminded when I was talking about this niggin in Shul in the context of Deuteronomy, I asked people to share with each other. I said, we're going to close the books. It's the Torah of the people who are in the room, and saying, okay, what's something of your past, something that you remember that has served you, that has gotten you through a tough time, or that will get you through a tough time? Because that's kind of how I see Moses's presentation of the history. And I just let people talk for a little while. And what I discovered a long time ago in doing text study, it's much nicer to start a niggin than to shush people. So you just start a nigun, and people kind of one by one join in until everybody's singing along, and then you close it off. And it's so much nicer than saying, okay, quiet, now we're going to talk. And I reminded people that when you came to visit our community, that niggin is the first one that you taught us. And you taught it at what was sort of nominally a family or children's service. And to this day, this nigun, which, as you said, had laid dormant for 100 years, now when I start it around 6 and 7-year-old children in Burbank, California, they not only remember the tune, they also remember like the little dance that you put along with it, how you just sort of leaned in and stood up, and they jibe right to it. And that's Tichas Amazing, right? That's how would Berezovsky have ever imagined that? Right. I don't know that he's been to Burbank.
That the little work that he did major work, but that little work of writing down that melody, transcended the generations. Mm-hmm. And it just reappeared. It makes me cry just thinking about that. And that's what the things we're doing too, that we don't even know, just little things that we do will, God willing, have impact like that someday in ways that we can't even plan.
Well, speaking of impact we can't plan, is there something that you're working on right now that you want Jewcurious people to know about?
There's all kinds of events coming. I mean, but I'd love for, to have any folks join us at Hadar for our Singing Communities Intensive in December in New York, which is we do every year, and it's been getting more and more beautiful each time. So please come and join us December, whatever, you look it up at hadar.org. And, we're starting this Rising Song Institute where we're really trying to cultivate Jewish spiritual life through song. And we'd love to have you guys involved in any way you want to be. But more to the point, those are the things I'm doing, but what's more important is what are you going to do? Right. And can you go and learn one melody, literally just one? Can you just learn one melody and sing it with a few friends and bring it to life? Can you learn a piece of wisdom and share it? Because we need the sharing in the world, and we need the sharing of beauty and of wisdom, more than any other time, maybe it's always been this way. But it seems urgent to me that we reconnect with each other through song and wisdom sharing. And I want to know how all of you guys, if you don't mind me being so bold, whoever's listening, if one of you goes and learns a melody and shares it, then we'll have made an impact here. Right.
Okay, can I ask you a favor?
Yeah.
So, because I love this idea, would you teach us a song?
Yeah. So let me sing that one that we just sang.
Okay.
Because it's nice to be able to pass on the melodies from the old times. We can also sing new things, but we can also sing old things and make them new. And I just want to share also that you do not have to be a great singer or even think of yourself as a singer at all in order to add a lot to the music of the world. There are a lot of times people who have not had the best voices, because we all have, to put it mildly, different relationships to tonality. My mother had perfect pitch, and so whenever the synagogue choir would start to sing, she would turn to me and let it be known exactly what she thought about it. I won't go into exactly her language, which always made me laugh, by the way. But I think that there have been people who've shown up at shul when I've been leading davening, and sometimes somebody will walk into the room who really doesn't have a good voice at all, who can't sing in tune, who doesn't even really know the melodies. And yet the room can set on fire because of that person's energy and intention and beauty. And so we all have a lot to add, no matter where we come from. And we have a lot to add to the song, to the life song. Mm-hmm. So here's that melody. Dum bum bum dum 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 bum 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 dim bum 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 repeats dum bum dum bum dum 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 la 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 dum bum 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 dum 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 la 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 Starts again, like that. And always that first section, you repeat it twice because it builds up the drama. You don't want to get to the high section too fast. The basic idea of every melody like this is that we first have to get rooted in the earth and in the ground, so to speak, and then we gradually climb the ladders of song to the heavens, and the melody gets higher and higher, and then at the end we climb that ladder back down to earth. It's imitating Jacob's ladder, where the angels, who are vessels of song, climbed up and climbed back down in the musical dreamscape.
That's well, first off, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And that tune has a special place in my heart. I think it's the first nigun that I ever taught to somebody else. Right, the first one that I sang the 20 times that you recommend and learned it well enough to teach it to somebody else, and then passed it on to somebody, and that you shared it with the Jewcurious audience means the world to me. It really does. Yeah, there was something else I was going to say, but I'm speechless. So no, that was wonderful. Yeah, I can't add anything to that.
Yeah, let it be that when you go out to sing, let the feelings into your song, right, and let it carry. Let each song, each melody, each note carry the wisdom and the sorrows and the joys of your life and of the lives that you all and we all represent, that have come before us, and all the journeys that have brought us to this place, and that can be the beginnings of all the life that's to come.
Joey, thank you so much for an amazing conversation. Some really wonderful teaching for the people listening to the show. One last question. How can people best get in touch with you or learn about you or connect with you to learn more?
It's easy to find me, joeyweisenberg.com, and it's easy to find the work that I'm doing on risingsong.org, which is a new website for the organization we're building, and we'd love to get you guys involved. So feel free to be in touch.
Hero, thank you so much for listening to this conversation. I know this one's been longer than previous conversations that we've had that I've shared on the show. So I just want to say a couple of more things before we sign off. And that is that the show notes for this episode are available at jewcurious.show/episode 7. That's the word episode, the numeral 7 after jewcurious.show, with a / in between. So check that out and you'll see links to Joey's books, Joey's CDs, videos of his Hadar ensemble on YouTube, and all sorts of other ways to connect with him. A link to that Singing Communities Intensive in New York that happens every December, and I highly recommend it. I plan to be there this year, and I'd love to see you there too. And finally, on the show notes, you'll see a link to the 31-day Jewish Fall Holidays Challenge. Click on that big gold button at the bottom of the show notes page, and you'll find a way to sign up for the challenge, what you can expect during the entire month of August to learn with me, as well as something that I'm giving away to make this whole thing a little bit more fun, and that is the possibility for you to win an entire starter Jewish library. That's books about prayer, books about holidays, books about philosophy, the addition to the Bible that I recommend to everybody, and some recipes. You need recipes, yes? So check that out. Sign up right now so that you just start getting everything as soon as the 31-day challenge starts on August 1st. And I can't wait to see what we learn together, how we grow together, and maybe even the music that we will make. Hero, thanks again for listening, and until next time, peace.
Thanks for listening to the Jewcurious Show at www.jewcurious.show.